hardship, setting and accomplishing goals, and trust and vulnerability, those things, those are going to be the important bedrocks of meaningful discipleship relationships. If you work and lean into allowing all those things into your discipling relationship, that is how you're most likely going to end up with something that's really powerful and transformative, and not only for the person you're discipling, but for you. Welcome to the Train to Serve YouTube channel, where we are trying to create a toolkit of resources to help you establish a culture of servant leadership in your church or ministry. So I encourage you to take a minute to look down below and get the free discipleship outline that we're offering to you. All you need to do is share your email with us, and if you don't unsubscribe, you'll be able to get access to a weekly newsletter with resources and materials that you can use to continue to grow and to use in your personal ministry. So now to the video. Hi, and welcome back to another Train to Serve YouTube video. And today I want to go back to our discussion of relationship. We're trying to continue to build resources so that the discipleship outline is as helpful as possible to you. And so that just means kind of going back over and covering some of the things that I think we maybe missed or I wanted to delve deeper into from the previous categories. So far we've created 6 videos on all the different categories of the discipleship outline. And I wanted to circle back to relationship and answer a crucial question that I think ultimately kind of is what determines whether a discipleship relationship is actually going anywhere or not. And that is this question of, is my discipleship relationship meaningful, right? Is this relationship that I have with this individual a meaningful one? Because the truth is that a lot of times in ministry, we have different opportunities to connect with people, to establish relationships and to kind of mentor them or to try to disciple people. But a lot of those relationships don't actually end up going anywhere. Or circumstances change and the times don't align and we can't meet up. Or even just there's something happens and that relationship isn't the same anymore. True discipleship only happens in the context of meaningful relationships. And the whole reason for that is because the ultimate goal of discipleship is for the individual to experience, to witness, and to grow closer in meaningful relationship with God. And in order to do that, they have to understand and be in a meaningful relationship with an individual, I think, if that really is going to be a healthy and thriving discipleship relationship. So ultimately, that brings us back to this question, is how do I give a discipleship relationship the best possible chance to be a meaningful one? And I think there's 3 main things that we see in meaningful relationships that are really going to help us and be instructive in trying to give these discipling opportunities the best chance possible to continue and to thrive and be really impactful and become meaningful relationships. So the first thing that I think leads to meaningful discipleship relationships is one that people don't want to hear, and that is hardship. The truth is that relationships, meaningful, strong relationships that last, are typically forged through difficult circumstances. Let me explain a little bit more. Robin Hood and Little John, they engage in a battle with each other and they earn this respect for one another. And then all of a sudden, they're both like, yeah, we're in it for life, right? I'll back you no matter what, right? In war movies, you see, and even if you talk to veterans, when they talk about people who they became close with, they were people who understood what they were going through, what they went through, and they helped see them through it. And you realize that there's a different type of closeness. And that's because hardships are a place where people experience things together, and then being able to get out on the other side really creates a camaraderie, a relationship that a lot of people, you can't fake, right? It's something that just like when you have a sports team and you've got these guys and you're digging in and you're trying to, either score a basket or keep the other person from scoring a basket in basketball. And when you work together and you prevent them from scoring, or you score a bucket in an important moment, those things are galvanizing, and they're things that you remember forever. And there's something about that, about hardship, about difficult circumstances, that really brings people together in a special way. And I think there's a number of different reasons for this. The truth is that nothing communicates something to someone else like, I'm gonna sit here in this difficult circumstance with you until we make it out on the other side. There's just nothing like that, right? And I can think of times in my life, whether it was in college or when my dad was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and when our whole family changed because we adopted 3 kids in like 2 years, and all those difficult transitions and changes and hard times, the people who were there for me and with me and checking in on me, and I knew I could rely on, those are people and relationships that are incredibly meaningful, right? And it's because you just can't fake the camaraderie, and I think even just the expression of care for another person, that you would be with them even when they're at their worst, right? Even when their life is falling apart and things are not going well, that you would stay with them, that you would sit with them, that you would ask them questions, that you would care for them, right? Because the truth is that people going through difficult circumstances aren't often enjoyable people to hang out with, right? It's oftentimes really difficult to sit and be with people who are really struggling, because they can't find any joy or happiness in their life. They're struggling to find anything. They're often tend to complain a lot, or they oftentimes tend to dominate conversations because they just can't not talk about what they're going through. And so what ends up happening is you end up, sitting there a lot. You end up being there for them, and oftentimes to really encourage them, it takes you. It means you taking some risks or going out of your way to serve people in a way that's really inconvenient for you. And so I think about that, and I don't think a lot of people are willing to go through hardships with other people in the way it requires to form meaningful relationships. And it's like I said, it requires sacrifice. It requires being willing to sit and be with people who aren't enjoyable to be with in that moment, right? It requires effort and energy, right? Because even just being with people who are experiencing that kind of pain and hurt, that like sucks energy from you. It takes something from you. And then being willing to think about what their needs are at that moment and to find ways to meet them. Those times you do that, they'll never be forgotten by the people going through hardship. I think when you're forming meaningful relationships, those things last forever. And so while that's difficult, right? It's difficult to go through hard times with people because we'd rather have things be comfortable, right? The culture that we've grown up in is we make things as comfortable as possible, right? And we try to curate things so they're not hard. And then we're kind of surprised when we don't have meaningful relationships. And it's because the people you've always been, you've never gone through anything with them. And it's not to say that you can't form meaningful relationships through good experiences. We're going to talk about that in a minute. But really, one of the most important ways to see how meaningful a relationship is to see what happens to that relationship when circumstances become incredibly difficult and when life becomes challenging. We look at the example that Christ set, and what did he desire most leading up to the cross? He desired for his disciples, the people he was closest with, to be there with him at the end, right? That's what he desired, is for them to be there with him at the end. That's what he spent his last time on earth, last hours doing, right? He met with the people he was closest with. And even though a lot of them disappointed him because they were humans, you also see how in the end, when Christ dies but then returns, that he enters back into relationship with those guys, and he forgives Peter, and the relationship is not only restored, but it's strengthened. And so we walk with people through hardship because that's the example that Christ set, right? That's what that's what Christ did for Paul when circumstances were difficult, right? When Peter is going out and he's establishing the churches, he's doing it because of his relationship with Christ and because of the difficult circumstances that Christ has helped him get through. And so we are supposed to be ambassadors of Christ. We're supposed to model that to other people, to represent Christ by acting like Christ. And that means walking with people through hardship. A second piece I see in giving meaningful relationships the best chance to form and to be created is setting and achieving goals together, right? And this is kind of like the flip side of what I just discussed in hardship, because you can get those things through hardship and experiencing it together, but also if the hardship never turns into something positive, or there's never anything accomplished as a result, odds are that relationship will not last, because through that rigor and through that all of that intensity, it's going to put a huge strain on that relationship. And so you need to have a facet of that relationship where people are working together, setting and accomplishing goals, right? And it's kind of like if you're on a sports team, right? And you are all getting together, you're working towards one goal, right? It's to practice really hard to be ready for a game, to win games, to win the season, to win tournaments, right? You all are trying to focus on the same goal, right? You're setting goals little by little to accomplish greater goals. You need both parts of that. You need to be able to set the goals together and actually be intentional about that, right? There's a camaraderie in that. It's let's accomplish this together, and then to go and achieve those things together, it forms this special bond that is really unique. Like I talked about, sports teams. If you ask people who have been on highly successful teams before, they remember the players that they were with when they won big games, or when they won championships, or were really successful. They remember the guys who they were with, because there's something about the camaraderie and a deeper relationship being formed when everyone is working on the same thing, right? The same types of goals, and they're accomplishing them together. And so when it comes to discipleship, impactful, meaningful discipleship relationships are not ones that are, you're not really sure where they're going, or it's ambiguous how things are developing. No, meaningful discipleship relationships take place when the people in that relationship, they're setting goals and accomplishing them together, right? When the individual who's trying to grow in their faith and they're being discipled, right? When they have goals that they're trying to accomplish, and then they meet them, and the person who's discipling them is excited about that and gets to celebrate with them, like, wow, look how far you've come. Look how much you've grown, right? And you see how impactful that can be when you are working one-on-one with a person. You say, like, hey, let's look at this. Let's start here and kind of track where we want to go, right? What are the things that we want to accomplish or grow in, and then to come out a month or two later and see, wow, like, look how much change has happened. Look how much we've accomplished together, and what Christ has accomplished in you. That's something worth celebrating, and it really brings people together in a powerful way. I think the third piece that I really see in meaningful relationships are things that are happening during hardship and during setting and accomplishing goals. But it's two things, and it's trust and vulnerability, right? When trust is formed between the two people in the relationship, and to a point that they're able to be vulnerable, that is where really meaningful relationships thrive. In marriage relationships, when the partners trust each other in a very strong way, in a very close way, and allows them to be vulnerable with each other so they can learn more about each other, and they can work together, especially if they have kids, right? That is really meaningful and powerful way to bond with people, to form meaningful relationships. Just like the example that I was talking about earlier in hardship with men who had been through battle before, right? Oftentimes what we see is that after that hardship is conquered, that those guys trust each other on a completely different level than they used to before. And that allows them to be vulnerable, right? To be willing to say, man, I really didn't think I was going to make it out of there. Or I have doubts about whether we're going to make it out of this war, or we're going to make it out of this battle, or whether we're going to win this game. And then that allows the other person to come alongside them and say, hey, I'm worried about that too. And yet I think that we can conquer this together. That is such an important bedrock to establishing meaningful relationships. When you get to that point of trust and vulnerability, where you trust each other really well and you can be open and honest with one another, that's how meaningful relationships also, they continue, right? If meaningful relationships will not continue if trust is lost and they aren't able to be vulnerable anymore. There'll still be relationships, but meaningful relationships that last, they continue to build trust and they continue to be vulnerable with each other over and over and over again. And so that is really, I think those three things: hardship, setting and accomplishing goals, and trust and vulnerability, those things, those are going to be the important bedrocks of meaningful discipleship relationships. If you work and lean into allowing all those things into your discipling relationship, that is how you're most likely going to end up with something that's really powerful and transformative, and not only for the person you're discipling, but for you. Something that you can see growth happening within you. You can see how much it's challenged you, how much you've grown and transformed through this experience of really trying to be an example to this other person who's less mature in their faith. Those things are really powerful, and it's amazing to see what happens. I just want to add one last thing, and this is a little bit of a sobering truth, but the hard part of trying to establish meaningful relationships is the aspect of risk, because you're always at risk for these relationships to not work out. I think if you ask anybody nowadays why there may be a hesitancy towards getting married, and it's probably because what if everything blows up, right? What if this doesn't work out? If people are struggling to form relationships with friends, oftentimes what you'll find is I'm afraid to put myself out there in a way that will lead me to getting hurt. And the truth is there's no way to do this without taking that risk. If you really want to form meaningful relationships, you have to risk the chance of getting hurt. It's gonna happen in relationships in life. If it hasn't already happened to you, I promise you that it will. And yet I would also say that as someone who's had lots of meaningful relationships and a number of relationships that have just not worked out, and I feel hurt by them, that it's still worth pursuing meaningful relationships, especially meaningful discipleship relationships. That risk is inherent to all things that we do. I believe we like to think that because of the type of world we live in, there's no risk. And yet, if the past few years have taught us anything, risk is everywhere. Even when we think everything's okay or everything's going to be fine forever, right? Problems always pop up. Things always sour. Things go bad. Bad things happen. We live in a broken world. And so we can expect that things are not going to work out as they should. And yet, it's still worth pursuing these meaningful relationships because of what they can do for us, the way they can encourage us to walk more closely in our faith, the way it can encourage us to continue to establish more meaningful relationship with God, right? Because like we said, that's the goal of discipleship is to help people walk in closer relationship with God. And we do that by modeling that. And so I know it's scary, and I know that it might be a difficult thing to do, and yet I think it's completely worth it to take the risk in establishing meaningful discipleship relationships with people. It's worth doing it. And I would hope that you would have the courage and the wisdom in knowing how to do that well, and being willing to go out, put yourself out there a little bit in order to pursue these things, because really they will bless you for the rest of your life if you choose to do this. And God will bless you through that in incredible ways that I think you might never expect to happen. So that's it for this video. I hope you'll check back next week. If you haven't already, make sure you get the discipleship outline below. I think there's a link in the comments that you can click on to pull it up, and you can subscribe to our weekly newsletter as well, where we offer you more resources on how to disciple people or how to grow in your own spiritual walk. So that's it for now, and we hope to see you next time. Have a good one.